Welcome to Local Edition on Time Warner Cable. I'm Steve Swat with the special expanded edition of the Sacramento Report. In the next few minutes, we're going to talk about a government regulatory agency that is receiving some rare applause from a Republican. My guest is David Hadley, a member of the State Assembly from Torrance. Thanks for being with us.
Great to be here, Steve.
So you know what Republicans in our hyper-partisan era these days think of regulatory agencies, so that they overreach and have too much power, but you think the California Air Resources Board did a really good thing regarding the Volkswagen fraud situation.
Absolutely. So as many of your audience probably know, the Volkswagen has defrauded its customers and has defrauded the regulatory organizations that oversee it around the country and around the world. And the California Air Resources Board was really the first to figure this out, and they played a key role in determining that Volkswagen had in fact been understating the emissions released from its cars, the pollutants released from its cars. So I've introduced a resolution to recognize that good work and thank them for it.
CARB, Air Resources Board, usually is quite a target for some of your colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle.
Absolutely, and I have many disagreements with CARB and with many of the regulatory agencies in California, but I think that if we're going to do our job and oversee these regulatory bodies in the legislature, we need to recognize good work when good work is done and call them out when they need to improve, and this is a case where they did good work.
Let's talk about a related issue that I know is close to you, and we can say that for the most part you're an environmental Republican, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, proud to be.
And you probably reflect the views of your district along the South Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So last year, Senate Bill 350 was approved. It was a far-reaching climate change bill, primarily, dealing with renewable energies and things like that, and more efficiency in state buildings.
Mm-hmm.
You supported that as it was amended.
Correct, although there's a bit of a story there I'd love to tell quickly. Mm-hmm. The bill really had three key pieces to it. It was raising the renewable energy standard for electricity for the utilities. It was increasing the energy efficiency of buildings, as you mentioned. And then finally, it was going to require the reduction of petroleum used in transportation by 50% in California in 15 years. And that third piece was by far the most problematic. I didn't believe it was achievable. I certainly didn't believe it was achievable without devastating economic impacts and increases in the price of gas for California consumers. So I actually voted against SB 350 twice in committee and helped create the coalition of legislators in the Assembly who wanted to support SB 350 but not the petroleum provisions. And ultimately, the bill that was passed by the Assembly and was signed by the governor that I was proud to support did include the higher efficiency standards in electricity, but dropped the most contentious petroleum provisions.
And you provided, obviously, one of the key votes.
Absolutely. I was proud to be a yes vote after having needed to express my objections earlier in the process.
What about the cap and trade, which has sort of been and using cap and trade for to help finance the high-speed rail? That is sort of been an issue that many of your colleagues oppose.
Well, let's separate the issues. In terms of high-speed rail, I'm a strong, vocal, consistent opponent of high-speed rail. I believe it is an environmental and a financial disaster for the future of California. We are never going to build it. The only questions are how many billions of dollars and how many tens of thousands of acres of farmland we destroy before we give up. And I'm a strong voice to stop that project before we continue to spend money on it.
Despite voter approval for a bond, $9.99 billion to help finance it.
Correct. Over 7 years ago, the voters of California did approve the first $9 billion of bond financing for that project, but so much has changed since then. The cost has more than doubled. It's now the most expensive public works project in the history of the United States. The promise of federal and private sector money to complement state money have not been realized. We're on our own to finance this thing. The train goes slower, it goes to fewer places. It's not high-speed rail, it's not affordable rail, and California taxpayer money can be better spent on other things.
As you know, there's a proposed measure for the November ballot that would divert the rest of that bond money and use that for water storage.
Correct.
You support that?
I will support virtually any measure that results in stopping this project before more taxpayer money is wasted and more damage is done to cities and farmland in California. I do support that measure. I'm also exploring putting a different measure on the ballot, which would simply defund high-speed rail and let taxpayers decide how they want their bond and tax dollars to be spent otherwise.
That measure, that first measure we're talking about, diverting for water storage, it reduces the amount of water for the environment and increases it for agriculture, and that has come under fire from environmentalists. That's one provision in that measure.
Absolutely, and one of the reasons that I do support that measure, but I would rather give the voters of California a clean look at this. Let's just revote the high-speed rail.
Up or down?
Up or down. We don't need to complicate this with whether those proceeds should go to specific water measures or a specific education bond. There have been other alternatives proposed as well. The voters of California deserve a second vote on this train.
And I'm aware of a recent poll, a statewide poll in California that indicates that high-speed rail has really slipped down in terms of a public priority for voters.
Absolutely. I'm highly confident, based on what the voters have learned since they originally approved the bond measure in 2008, I believe if the voters are given a second look, they will terminate this project.
One other issue I want to talk about is a piece of legislation that you introduced last year, and the governor signed it. It had to do with military families and their choice of schools. Explain that. And the governor did, as I mentioned, sign that.
Absolutely. I'm very proud of this. This was passed by both chambers of the legislature, and the governor signed it into law, so it's now the law of the state of California. For the children of military service personnel in California, what this law does is it allows them to pick the public school district that is right for their children without requesting permission from the school district in which they live. So you think about our military families, in addition to their service to their country, there's really two things that distinguish them from most civilian kids. The first is they don't usually get to choose where they live. They're assigned to a base, and in general they can't afford to buy a home to just live in an area for 2 or 3 years. And the second way they're different is that they move a lot. And so spending a year or 2 years in a waiver permission process to get kids into the right school district for those kids is they may only live in that area for 2 or 3 years before they move on to their next assignment. So what my bill, which is now state law, said is that if you're a military service family, you can seek the right school district for your children. You don't have to ask permission from the school district that you live in to send your kids to another district.
And this is for public school.
And this is for public schools. This is public school choice.
Right.
That's correct.
All right. David Hadley, thank you very much for coming by here and discussing these issues. We appreciate it.
Steve, thanks for having me.
And thanks to our viewers for watching Local Edition on Time Warner Cable. A reminder, you can see this and other interviews on YouTube, My Government On Demand, and the California Channel. Have a great day.